Adidas Archive, a windowless climate-controlled space jam-packed with priceless historical Adidas products. Among them, of course, are football products. And in this mini-series, we'll take a look at Adidas' oldest football boots, some epic and pretty weird Predators, and all of their World Cup balls.
Right, to be fair, I could probably spend a couple of hours just walking around picking out products to look at, but we're here to talk about the football boots. And behind me we have some of the earliest examples of innovation. Now, this might be way too early for many of us to even remember, but it just goes to show how early innovation in football boots actually started and how far they actually went back then. The earliest piece that they have in the archive is this. It's called the Fußballstiefel, basically just the football boot in English. It was made by the Dassler brothers shoe factory, which was when Adolf and Rudolf Dassler were actually working together in the football boot factory. They later split, formed two companies, but it just goes to show that even back then, football boots looked way different than they do today, and it weighs a ton, and it was obviously, as you can tell, it was mostly focused on protection. Like it's not the most nimble thing in the world. Let's just put it that way. Then we move to 1954 and the Argentina, which some people called a little bit of like material cheating, because back then what the Argentina was up against was this, which is essentially as heavy as like a brick, and that's all leather. So you can imagine when you were playing in the wet, it absorbed a lot of water and it got really heavy. Now, what they were up against in the Argentina here was a football boot that kind of disrupted everything. It was slightly lower cut. It was made with thinner leather, meaning that it fit a little bit better. It wasn't as chunky. And also it had the first implementation of what we know as screw-in studs today. So not only were they able to screw in the studs in the outsole, but they actually also did it in the midsole, meaning that you had a much better functioning system that meant that you could actually adapt the studs to the playing surface that they were on back then. And it gave the players that wore this in the World Cup final for Germany what some people would call an unfair advantage. What's also funny here, what they told me, is that back then, players used to lace their boots all the way around the ankle to get a better fit. And that's actually something they accounted for by having these little flaps here that the laces could go under, even into this little lace loop at the back to give that heel lock-in. Which is, this is 1954. And there's, by today's standards, it may seem pretty rudimentary, but back then, that's a huge leap for football boots. Then we move to 1966, where we have the diamond, that introduced the first flex sole, basically a nylon sole here that had a thinner base here under the forefoot that allowed it to flex a lot better. That simply meant that the sole itself was less stiff. That's something we expect a football boot today to be, but it really flexed a lot better in the forefoot and helped to feel more nimble on your feet. And already then we can see that it takes the shape of that iconic Adidas silhouette that we know today. 1966, really special. And then we move on to the late 60s, early 70s, where we have these two boots called the High, basically the Shark, where Adidas actually went in and I don't think it's unfair to call these like very early, not Predator prototypes, but working with similar concepts, right? Where Adidas actually took sharkskin, actual sharkskin, and they put them on the boots. And that means that, sharkskin, it's pretty interesting, because if you rub it one way, it's pretty smooth, but when you go then against it, it almost takes off the glove here, because it's very sticky. And that meant that as you have the ball and you hit it like that, it starts to grip the ball, and as we know with SL rubber today, you would get that added grip and potentially swerve and control over the ball. So this was one of the first concepts that was worn, but they also made this, which is, it really sticks to the glove, which is really crazy, because not only does it have a big piece of sharkskin on top of the boot and on the sides here, but it also introduced an asymmetrical lacing that we also know today, really cleaning up the striking surface and allowing for a grip control element on top of the boot. Again, we're talking 70s here, late 60s, early 70s, which for me to see these concepts on football boots even back then, is pretty impressive. Now this is a prototype, a concept, but still very, very fun to see, and actually, you know, really smooth, and I almost can't move the glove. And you could probably ask yourself, why didn't they continue with the high concept? Because it is, I mean, it's pretty damn effective when you touch it. The thing is that the shark skin was actually too effective. It gripped the ball so much that it actually destroyed what were leather balls back then. So it was a really cool concept, but you couldn't really wear it because you would just tear the balls apart. So that didn't really work. It was too good for the time. Imagine someone shooting the ball with a Predator now and just ripping it to pieces. Yeah, so it's a great idea, but wild. Then we move a little bit later into the 70s, 1973, where we have the Adda Special here. It's just going into the era where we started having more colorful football boots. Back then, this was crazy. And I know a yellow and black football boot by today's standards, it's not particularly wild, but back then, it was, you know, people were like, are you serious? And maybe it was actually a little bit too much on the wild side for most football players back then, because they were bright and they stood out. So a really colorful era, very playful for Adidas. But what Adidas actually also did, something we see today with the women's version of the F50, is that they cooked up this. This is called the Adidas Anya, which is funny because it was named after the developer's daughter. Now what this did was to basically take a regular football boot and engineer it on a last that was a little bit slimmer to make it fit women's feet better. And they also had a stud pattern that was engineered specifically for them to think a little bit more about the rotational forces, and again, like they look at today, to avoid knee injuries and all that stuff, you know. Maybe it wasn't as scientific back then, I doubt that, but still, it's great to see how they were actually thinking of making women's specific football shoes back in the 70s. And you can probably draw a lot on the learnings and the concepts even today. Now what we also have, of course, here is the last football boot that Addi Dassler himself ever worked on, the World Cup. And I mean, if you're over 30 and you play football, you probably met a World Cup football boot before, which has the iconic screw-in studs, it has the iconic look, and is really connected to the Copa Mundial that came a couple of years later in 1982. So made for the World Cup in 1978, this is the last football boot that Adda Special himself ever worked on. Screw-in studs, that iconic silhouette, beautiful, beautiful. But actually, it got crazier than, I don't know if you can call it crazier, but it got just as crazy with the FE, which was actually taking the high concept and amplifying it a little bit, having this synthetic skin with little suction cups on the side. It almost feels a little bit like, you know, a table tennis bat, which we'll get back to. That was also like really, really sticky. You can almost hear it. So basically a Beckenbauer with you know, an amplified touch element on the side. Really crazy. I don't know if it ripped the balls back then, but yeah, it's fun to see. And we're still talking 70s here. But of course, they also have what I would consider one of the OGs, the Adidas Copa Mundial from 1992, which, when you look at it, yes, a couple of details have changed. Some of the logos are different from today. But actually, if you take a 2024 Copa Mundial and compare it to this, it's basically the same, which is impressive that such an old boot still has so much going for it today. So always fun to see. Naturally, Adidas also did a 25th anniversary version of the Copa Mundial. The box here is just, it's lovely, and it's just fun to see, you know, they still have it, you know, original box, leather cream, cloth, it's all there. But they also had this sitting around, which is a fun one that never saw the light of day in terms of being released to the public. But some of you might already recognize that this is actually the pattern from the Tricolor World Cup ball from 1998. But the fun thing is, and I didn't realize this from just looking at it on pictures, but it's actually the ball. The actual material from the ball that's been cut up and made into a Copa Mundial, a synthetic football Copa Mundial. And apart from looking really cool, that's just, that's wild. A football made into, but yeah, they also have that. we have more boots because it's full of it down here. What we have here on the table, as you can see, is a lot of Predators. And you might recognize some of them, but there will also be a couple that you've probably never seen before and will wonder, what is that, Jay? And I'm gonna try and tell you at my best ability, because I also haven't seen a lot of this stuff before, like, but we're gonna get through it. The Predator originated back in 1994, but there's a backstory before that, where you've obviously heard the story around how Craig Johnston, the ex-Liverpool player, he innovated the whole concept. He was out teaching kids how to apply swerve on the ball. He said, you have to do the motion as if you're playing table tennis, like you apply swerve to a table tennis ball. And the kid said, but a football boot doesn't have rubber on it like a table tennis bat. So Craig Johnston went home, he stripped the table tennis bat and wrapped it around a boot. And after a couple of back and forths with Adidas and actually making the boot, taking it to the Bayern Munich leadership that had connections to Adidas, convincing them, they finally agreed to make the boot. And this is the final product that came out in 1994. 100% legal, 0% fair. And it basically shaped the boot into what we see today. But before that came out in 1994, they also did some prototypes, as you can see here. In 1993, where they were working with the rubber elements here, the Predator elements, but they really wanted to maximize the amount of elements they had on the forefoot here to connect with the ball. And that also meant that they had to minimize the lacing a little bit. So they did that. You only have like 2 lace holes, which is wild, to say the least. It almost went laceless in 1993, which is cool. But also the tongue is crazy, because with only 2 lace holes, you have a lot of pressure coming from the laces. So to combat that, you actually have an inflatable tongue. You can see here, you can actually blow some air into the tongue with a pump that, like, that's pretty wild, to be fair. I've never seen this one before. 1993. Obviously, what we also have is a lot of player exclusives, custom boots for pro players. We have this David Beckham Predator Precision from 2001. I'll be very careful not to touch the rubber band, because it is not in the best shape. And that's what happens with older boots with these elastic rubber bands holding down the tongue. They don't really age all that well. But on Beckham's Precision here, he was the first player to get a larger tongue. He loved his fold-over tongue, so they made it larger for him. And obviously it has all his little customizations here. The England flag, the date, his name on here. Really, really cool to see. And just, as a Man United fan myself, seeing an actual Beckham custom boot in the flesh is quite special. We also have the Zidane Precision from 2000, where he won World Player of the Year, in gold, which is something I'd actually come to terms with never seeing this in the flesh in my life either. And now I'm holding it in my hands. I'm trying not to shake, because this is big, you know. Red Predator tongue, gold stitching, his signature on there. I mean, yeah, this is a moment to cherish. Obviously, very, very cool. And I guess a one-off? There's just a couple of these, right? So yeah. Beckham Predator Manias 2002 for the World Cup. Japanese stitching on the tongue and on the instep here, which is cool. You know, the little Beckham, that's actually not stitched on, but just like printed on, which is amazing. Bigger tongue, SG outsole, it's one of those things you just need to see. Jude Bellingham Preds, because why not? This never came in SG, but Jude got it in SG because he's Jude Bellingham, and he's the new guy. So yeah, it's signed obviously. And there's lots more on this table, because now we've seen some of the stuff that you might recognize, but there's also like, this is 2006, and obviously it's not a football boot, but this is basically Adidas playing with the concept of having like a mesh with some TPU reinforcement on the outside. What then happened, we saw on the Adi Zero, for instance, in 2010, that they used this TPU skeleton on the inside of the boot to create that stability and that structure to give you lockdown and what you need. So interesting to see that they just play with all sorts of weird concepts on the Predators, on the prototypes, to end up, well, somewhere close to what they worked on. There are other concepts, however, that never saw the light of day. We can start back in 1998, maybe 97, with a Predator Accelerator prototype here, which, as you can see, it has the accelerator stripes, but the shot elements are not exactly very accelerator-like. They're big, they are very, very chunky compared to the usual accelerator elements. And it's just, I guess, them playing with and trying out to see what works. How do we get the best connection on the ball, but how does it also flex with the foot to not make it super, super predator edge like that was unbearable to move around in. What's also interesting here is that it has a little bit of like a, is that a, yeah? A little bit of a hidden lacing. That's nice too. You love to see that. That's, you know, prototype things, that's always great. And the Predator Accelerator will always be, in my book, one of the most beautiful boots, design-wise, that's ever been made. But it gets crazier. Let's go with this from 2010. I have no idea what it's called. I have no idea what it was ever supposed to be other than a Predator. The outsole is something I have never seen before on a boot that was actually released. There was rumblings of like a concept boot for you know, Adidas, honoring his legacy back in 2010. Whether this is a part of it, I don't really know, but it's absolutely crazy. It has vibes of like elements that are slightly chunky on both the inside and the outside of the forefoot. It has this rubberized leather that has a really weird feel to it. Some very soft stitching, Addy stripes here on the inside. Weird hidden lacing, lace cover kind of thing that I don't really know what it's supposed to do, but it looks funky. And probably one of the most unique Predator prototypes I think I've ever seen. Whether it would actually work in today's game or back in 2010, I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, if this had come out instead of the Predator X, I would not have complained. This looks better. There's also, of course, I forgot to mention this, the Predator Avero, which was a 2003-2004 thing, basically a Predator pulse, but without the Predator elements on it, so just a full leather upper, but a pulse nonetheless. It was called the Avero, came out in late 2003, but was obviously launched for the 2004 year, 2005, and just beautiful. These, back in the day, Adidas made the non-Predator versions of the Predators that were actually really, really nice. And finally, we have, well, we're gonna end with this because this is one of my favorite Preds ever, but before that, we have this bad boy that is just called Predator. Again, I've absolutely no idea what it is or what it's supposed to be, but I'm being told it's like a 2013 thing, it says on the tooling. It has vibes of like a Predator Lethal Zones thing because you have different elements. It's a rather soft synthetic upper. There's no tongue. It says Addy Power on the tongue. I'm just, someone had a field day just playing around with this, I guess. Little bit of like little studs under the forefoot, I guess something that we might see turn into what came out on the Instinct with the little control studs under the forefoot and all. Also, a funky concept. And finally, just, you know, it's just the standard Addy Power, but to me, one of the best Predators ever made. Actually, it ditched kangaroo leather. They did so on the X, which was kind of rubbish, but this was really good. It was Taurus leather, so calfskin, but it just had a lovely, lovely fit, really lightweight, and yeah, it did what a Predator was supposed to do, even without the tongue. So, oh yeah, 2017, they made this, like, it was like a mashup of what they did with all the knit and the sock collar thing, and then the OG accelerator upper here, made an all white out for David Beckham, of course, in his 7/23/32 collection. Also cool. Probably not something I would wear that much on the pitch, but on the shelf in an archive, it's cool to have. And this is just like a fraction, and I could talk for hours, guys, but yeah. So what we have behind me is one of the reasons I really wanted to come to the archive, because we have this big, beautiful case with all of the World Cup balls ever since 1970, where this ball, the Adidas Telstar, that was actually introduced in '68, was used in the World Cup. Basically, back then it was called Telstar because it looked different. It was more visible on television. Television star, cool. Really, really special ball, and you know, basically the iconic football look that's what you have right here. Obviously, a lot then happened during the years. You know, the balls got a little bit more advanced and, you know, had less water uptake and all that stuff. But they basically looked not similar, but they looked similar-ish in the sense they were black and white all the way up until 1994 with the Questra. That was the last like purely black and white World Cup ball. Because then in 1996, for the Euros in England, we had a colored version of the Questra Europe, that had the England colors, white, navy, and red. So that was pretty cool. Obviously, that whole colorful trend then continued to the tricolor in France, 1998. That kind of introduced a slightly more modern feel to the ball. It was a little bit lighter. It felt a little bit more, you know, pingy to strike than the Questra, and had a little bit of that liveliness that we know from Adidas World Cup balls, and also just France colors, tricolor, really cool. Obviously, then that kind of moved on to the 2002 Fever Nova. Beautiful, you know, the gold colors. That whole little hexagonal pattern in there. Also, a lively football, felt a little bit more, you know, had a little bit more zing to it than the tricolor, but was in the same family, right? But absolutely stunning. And then what happened was that in 2004, again for the Euros actually, Adidas introduced the Rotero, which is the first thermal bonded ball, meaning that it's actually been glued and heated together to minimize the water uptake. And that also meant a slightly rounder football, meaning that it had some aerodynamical capabilities that meant that it was interesting to play with. And Adidas continued the whole concept of aerodynamics and really lively balls, obviously with the Team Geist that we know here. Yeah, I don't think I need to say much. This was actually used in the World Cup final. You can see it has the inscription that they started doing in 2006. And obviously that continued again then to the Jabulani and the final ball, the Jobulani, that was played in Johannesburg. Again, used in the World Cup final, very, very good. But they added the hole, they had the panels, they had that really, really lively bladder and also some texture that made the ball more aerodynamic with the airflow coming out, creating a vacuum behind the ball, making it just went, right? Now, then we come back to 2014, where we had this era of really lively World Cup balls. 2014, it continued having some really interesting panels. It had a lot of texture on it, but it also went back to a slightly more, what we would probably know as a modern feel. It had a little bit more weight behind it and felt like it had the balance of stability and the liveliness that we expect from Adidas balls now. Telstar, if you're old enough, you'll probably remember that. It feels like it was yesterday it came out. I've been doing this for too long. But basically took the Brazuca concept and altered the panels, had bigger panel sizes to make it a little bit more stable, but felt by and large like a slightly refined Brazuca. And obviously we have I'm not gonna try and say the name of the regular World Cup ball, okay, I'll try it, the Al-Riahla or whatever, and then the final ball, the Al-Khil, which is a little bit easier to say. Again, refining the whole panel shape, really big panel edges here to make it stable, and also working on the bladder again. But all of this just goes to show that over the span of this many years, it started with like the graphics, making it a little bit more visible to see on television, working with leather balls, then transitioning into having synthetic balls that didn't take up as much water. Then they worked on the aerodynamics, the bladder, making them faster, and then coming back to probably the more modern era that we know today. Stunning, stunning. And the case, I mean, Louis Vuitton, joke, come on. And then, of course, there is the Adidas F50, which, despite only coming out in 2004, has really made its mark. And obviously now it's come back to us, which is kind of nice. I mean, the X was cool and all that, but the F50, I mean, personally, I have a lot of emotion connected to that. And as you can see here on the table, we've kind of handpicked a few cool things, some that you may have seen before and some that I actually don't really know what if it's even an F50, but we're gonna talk about that. I mean, we can start over here if you come closer, because I actually can't lift it up. This is from 2006 and actually done and painted by Lionel Messi himself. It's called Impossible is Nothing, and it was really done, I mean, this is Messi drawing Messi, and it's been actually painted on the boot, which is why it just has to be there, because otherwise the paint's gonna crack. What they also did in 2006 was all the country uppers on the F50.6 Tunit, which was obviously this modular football boot where you could change the studs and the uppers, and you had all these custom insoles that you could put in. It was really modular, it was really fun, but it also kind of sucked because the outsole really didn't work. It started cracking if you tightened the studs too hard or if you made too big, harsh movements. And you know, it was fun, and they did all these uppers for the World Cup with all the participating countries. Cool. But at the end of the day, the product itself wasn't the strongest. But from a vibe point of view, it was really cool. And staying in 2006-ish, because we don't really know, is this, which as you can see is laceless. So yes, there was a laceless concept all the way back in around 2006. Now what I think this is probably some sort of prototype on what ended up being the F50.7 laceless upper that you could get, which was basically the F50.7 just without the laces. And it might have and fixating the foot in place, this little Velcro tongue, which is cool, and obviously what looks to be an early prototype of the Tunit system. Something where Adidas was playing with a concept that ended up working and obviously releasing again big time in 2016. And the same can be said for this, which also looks to be on some sort of F50.6 tooling. And the rest is interesting to say the least. We also have a little cheeky tongue here. We have this, it's almost, might actually be some F50.8 stuff with all this translucent plastic in the heel and under the foot. Probably more correct. It says custom fit. It has these, like, this lacing system that's actually not laces. It's more like little strings that sit underneath this lace cover, or whatever we should call it, where you could pull this string and tighten the shoe, and then there was another mechanism to loosen it up again. And whether you then have these little, like, Predator-like elements on this rubberized leather, it's all very interesting. So F50.6, 8, 9 prototype, hard to say, but very interesting. What's also very interesting is something that's definitely from 2006 is the Y3 Yohji Yamamoto F50.6. Now there were 4 editions of this where they took inspiration from animals, creatures from Japanese mythology. Obviously this is the tiger, and it all came in a cage where you could pull these pins up and pull the boots out. And that kind of also acted as an inspiration for this. They made 1,000 pairs of each back in the day. It cost an arm and a leg to buy, and it would probably be, well, you'd have to sacrifice your entire body today to get a hold of these because they are very hard to find. But in 2014, Adidas released the latest, back at the time, Adidas F50 Adizero in collaboration with Yohji Yamamoto, in this absolutely insane design. We have the lion, which turned into like a robot lion, and it was, you know, it was a phenomenal football boot that also just is very iconic these days, and one I would kill to get my hands on. Absolutely smashing. Now, of course, what we also had to get out is something that is, or someone that is synonymous with the F50 line, Lionel Messi, the GOAT. The F50 Adizero, of course, kind of revolutionized the game again when it came out in 2010. Chameleon purple colorway with Messi customization, a little bit on the heel here. This in particular is not that special, it's just a standard F50 Adizero, but with the Messi customization on, it's kind of cool. Obviously, you also have his Ballon d'Or Player of the Year from 2012. Wasn't released to the public, but of course they have it here in the archive, which is also one of those boots that I never thought I would actually get to see in my life. So special, very special. All these little customizations, his logo, him winning the Ballon d'Or in the different years at the time. It's, yeah, very cool. And obviously, another grail if you are a boot nerd, Messi's actual boot from the 2022 World Cup. And we're not just talking the boot that you and I could buy, which came in this super cool suit kit. No. This is customized to Lionel Messi, meaning that instead of the knit upper, he actually had a hybrid touch upper. He had his burrito tongue, his custom heel foam. and his custom outsole as well. With, of course, you know, all his little customizations. And of course, because this is the Adidas archive, I mean, it's signed. Anything else will be late, right? Because, I mean, they do it or they don't do it. It's just, that's the way they go about it down here. So very, very cool little F50 selection here. Now, there's also a bunch of random cool stuff we found. This Climacool prototype boot from 2003 that basically took the Climacool running concept and made into a football boot, which is basically having ventilation everywhere to keep your feet cool. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. You know, it's in the tongue. You can see it's on the side panels here. It's even in the sole. Like you have a football boot with ventilation in the actual outsole. How crazy is that? In the heel counter, you know, it's everywhere. Is it something that would work? Maybe not. Maybe that's probably why it never came out, but it's cool nonetheless. And we also have from 2015 these African Cup of Nation boots. You have an 11 Pro here and also a Nitro Charge 2 in the same colorway, which also never came out, but look really cool, you know, blue, gold, very nice, very nice. But what we also found was a couple of PrimeKnit boots. Obviously the first PrimeKnit boot, the PrimeKnit Samba, came in 2014 in this Brazil-inspired colorway, taking all of the colors from the Samba pack for the 2014 World Cup and just mashed them up into this PrimeKnit boot that was released in 150 pairs, worn by Luis Suarez. As Liverpool beat Man United, he scored a lot of goals. That sucked as a United fan, but cool boot. Not very nice to wear because this was stiff as a boot. But what Adidas also did, a boot that never came to life, was this, a PrimeKnit Ace 17 Plus, which is basically just, you know, could it be that it's just the Ace 17 Plus uncoated? Could be. That might just be it because it has the same structure, and yeah, you know what? That might just be what we're looking at, but it's cool nonetheless. With some 1994 Predator inspired stripes and stuff. You find a lot of cool things in the Adi archive, I'm just gonna tell you. And obviously they have tons more, but for the sake of keeping it short and brief, that's what we should stick to. I'm gonna look at some more shirts. See you later.
Yep, tons of cool stuff in the video, and I'm not gonna lie, I can't wait to hopefully go back one day to see all of this stuff and some more again. But which was your favorite boot in the video here? Let me know below. Remember that if you just want the latest F50, you can buy from Unisport in the link to your right. And also, of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel before you leave. And with that, I'll be signing off. Cheerio.